So please join me to welcome the Deputy Minister to the stage.
I hope all of you have the Ubuntu magazine in front of you. So after today's engagement on page 86, there's an important responsibility for all KZN students to do. You know the South African goalkeeper. Is it what? Rowan Williams. He's the current goalkeeper of Africa, and he is now in a final and leading the voting for the FIFA goalkeeper of the year. So I would want to encourage all the students actually to vote for him. There's a system online, and Tlali, I think just before we leave, you'll just give them the details. It's a very simplified system. You will vote for the Dolenba and all the others, and as you swipe and go on, you will get to his section. That's what we call sports diplomacy in international relations, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Program Director, our anchor from Ubuntu radio station. I wish to acknowledge University of KZN, the council member with us today, Dr. Hay. Thank you very much for joining us. And then, of course, Professor Gopal and Director Zondo. Thank you very much for your kind words, faculty members, the leadership of the SRC. I appreciate the students that are here today. Let me indicate it's obviously a distinct privilege to be here this morning because South Africa are celebrating 30 years of democracy and freedom. And one of our key fights that this generation of young people must fight against is the fight against forgetfulness. That we look at South Africa through the optics of 1994 and not look at the reality that South Africa was a colonized nation from as far back as 1652, and that South Africa has been subjected to a brutal form of apartheid ideological orientation from 1948. And it's important for all students that are engaged in political economy, in international relations and political science. October month, ladies and gentlemen, also presents an important chapter within the diplomatic circles in South Africa and elsewhere. It is the month where we continue to celebrate the memories of Oliver Regional Tambo, whose birthday dates back to 1917, so it's the 107th year of birthday commemoration of Oliver Tambo. And we do so, ladies and gentlemen, to give credence to the role that Oliver Tambo have played as probably one of our most seasoned diplomats during the times of apartheid, and in particular his 30 years of protracted struggle in the international community, which ultimately led, ladies and gentlemen, to a decision of the United Nations to declare apartheid formally as a crime against humanity. So Oliver Tambo presents what we call the sum total of our accumulative experience of struggle. And that is why during this month we obviously given homage to him and the role that he have played. We are gathered this morning here in KZN amidst what we could characterize as quite unique geopolitical difficulties. The four key concentric circles upon which South Africa's foreign policy are premised on is the following four, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll briefly in my contribution speak on some of those issues. I hope that when you listen carefully, the first concentric circle we speak about, you know, our Pan-Africanism as a country and as a nation. The second concentric circle we speak about global solidarity, that we do regard ourselves as champion of global solidarity. The third, ladies and gentlemen, we speak about the need to continue to deepen cooperation with your more industrialized North, and the fourth speak about transformation of global governance. So those are the four concentric circles which define South Africa's imperatives when we engage in international relations and execute our foreign policy perspectives. The first one, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to touch on, obviously working backwards, and sometimes you will appreciate that these foreign policy pillars are interdependent and interrelated but independent. And I'll try to briefly reflect on that issue. When we speak as South Africa about transformation of global governance institutions, we speak about the need to ensure that we deepen multilateralism. Now, ordinarily, when we speak about deepening of multilateralism, it should obviously result in a changed world, isn't it so? A world that is based on social justice, a world where global governance institutions becomes the voice of the voiceless. That is what we speak about as South Africa. We have done that, ladies and gentlemen, because of a number of reasons. We have done that if we look at what we call the important role of the UN. Now, in the United Nations membership system, we have 193 member states that are formally recognized as UN member states. And the UN obviously have a number of concomitant organizations, such as your United Nations General Assembly, which is the one body where the accumulative interest of all member states should find expression into. We just came from what we call UNGA 79 that was convened in the US. And then one of the other important structures that is pivotal for world peace and security is the United Nations Security Council, what we call the UNSC, isn't it so? Now, the UNSC, ladies and gentlemen, is the only structure in the entire multilateral system that is the final arbiter and that has the powers to execute peace diplomacy. To execute peace diplomacy, but also to enforce peace missions. So it's the only structure. But NATO is a regional military alliance, the only structure and fora within the UN that have the express mandate for world peace and security is the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council. It's such an important organization, but it's so untransformed. It's so important, but it's so untransformed. Why, ladies and gentlemen? For a very simple reason, that the UNSC is the consequence of the aftermath of the World War II, where the big powers converge and said that, look, under our watch, never again must world peace and security be threatened. And for that reason, we need to have an intermediary that will provide some sort of guarantor for world peace and security. And that's why the UNSC was then established. But the biggest difficulty with the UNSC, it constitutes of what we call 5 members. 5 members of the Security Council that have what we call a permanent status and that also possess a veto power. So yeah, you speak about the US, you speak about France and the UK, you speak about the PRC, which is China and the Russian Federation. Are we at one? And then you have 10 other members. Some diplomats refer to them as the E10. It's those members that gets elected to become transitional stewards of world peace and security on a 2-year rotational basis. And it's for that reason that, for example, South Africa was elected for 3 times since the advent of democracy. We were elected for 3 times, ladies and gentlemen, from our first tenure was obviously in 2007 in the UNSC. Now juxtapose that with the fact that in Africa alone, 70% of the workload of the UNSC is seized with African conflicts, African peace and security issues. But in the entirety of the UN system, you don't have an African seat that is permanent, and you only have 3 African countries, what we call the A3, that are there on a rotational basis every 2 years. Do you understand the problem that we face with? Remember early on I said it's one of the most important structures, but the most untransformed structures. So it's for that reason that what is in our lexicon, we speak about the African common position as espoused in the Isolwani consensus, where we say at least Africa must have 2 seats at a permanent basis in the UNSC. So that is our big fight when we speak about transformation of global governance institutions. And the second matter that I want to maybe just highlight, because I'm trying to, project some of the topical examples so that I think our student community can relate to our contemporary challenges. The second example is when we speak about the need to transform global governance institutions, ladies and gentlemen, is on the decisions of the WTO, your World Trade Organization. Now you would recall in 2000, we suffered under the horrendous global pandemic of COVID-19, isn't it so? It resulted in South Africa on the deaths of more than 100,000 people. For the one single reason, ladies and gentlemen, because of the question of vaccine nationalism. Vaccine nationalism speaks about the fact that when the World Health Organization actually categorized the COVID-19 as a global pandemic that transcends boundaries and borders, what your more industrialized north then did, ladies and gentlemen, is to stockpile vaccines for their citizenry. It stockpiled vaccines, it had an abundance of vaccines, and it refused at the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic to share and distribute that vaccines to the rest of the developing world. Then South Africa's president, President Ramaphosa, which was then chairing the AU and was also subsequently identified as the AU champion on COVID-19 pandemic, made a case that, look, South Africa have the capacity and the intellectual know-how to produce our vaccines locally. You remember that debate. So South Africa, together with one of our BRICS partners and IPSA member, India, made the case to the WTO to waive for interim level purpose the productive patents for vaccines. It took us, ladies and gentlemen, probably a full 2 years before the WTO agreed to submit the privilege of producing vaccines for COVID-19 to the developing world. So when I say we need to transform global governance institutions, it's exactly what we speak about. The third example that I want to make, and it deals obviously with economic diplomacy, is the matter of our agricultural products. Remember, all of our agricultural products, many of them, apart from local consumption, we export it, for example, to the EU, to the European Commission, isn't it so? To the European Union via the European Commission. And we are probably one of the best producers of agricultural products, and in particular citrus fruits. Because a number of countries in the EU, out of the 27 member states of the EU, a number of countries says, no, but the EU Commission must protect us. It must protect us from South Africa that have proven to have the capability and whose citrus fruits are actually the most preferred in the EU. The EU then introduced a number of what we call your sanitary mechanisms to ensure that it becomes so difficult for South Africa's farmers to export to the EU as possible. So as we speak, we have obviously filed as South Africa a dispute with the WTO in relation to what we regard as anti-competitive measures. So I hope that everyone are au fait with when we speak about the need to transform global governance institutions, what do we speak about and what needs to be done, not only to improve our lives, but to improve the lives of all other African states and to continue to champion the plight of your developing world. But there's a popular sentiment in society that we as South Africa, we don't need the G7 nations, because the G7 nations and the West generally has been part of colonialism. There's been part of supporting the apartheid doctrine in South Africa. And since 1994, they have been against the democratic government and what we call progressive internationalism. Now the difficulty with that for students of IR is to appreciate that South Africa's industrialization, where we stand today, it's primary and historically because of the G7 nations. Okay? Primary and historically because of the G7 nations. If you look at all your value-added products, the majority of them, if you look at your biggest automotive sector in South Africa, we export cars. We export cars. We export a car with an engine, complete tires, upholstery seats, fully make-up. We export it to the G7 nations in particular, which means through that process we are able to industrialize. So we need to deepen our relationship with the G7 nations, but it must be on our national interests, isn't it so? Uguti, we can have relations with the G7 nations, we can have relations with your industrialized North, but if people want to have relations with South Africa, they must understand we have the triple challenges of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. They must help us to industrialize. And that is our big engagement with the North. We want them to ensure that when we speak about science and technology, that we are on the par. We want them to be more truthful to us. Then the third concentric circle, ladies and gentlemen, that I want to speak about, and this has been obviously in the media for a number of reasons, where we speak about global solidarity. Now you would know that our freedom is because of the liberation movement. But the one reason why we managed to firstly get our freedom is because of the constellation of forces that were mobilized to be against apartheid. And we did that, ladies and gentlemen, during the time that Nelson Mandela lavished in jail for 27 years. And Oliver Tambo was that type of a person that have been consistent of making sure that we mobilize for unity of purpose against the apartheid machinery. We have our freedom. We are obligated, ladies and gentlemen, for example, on the struggles with the people of Palestine. Why we are so obsessed with their just struggle on self-determination. You know, self-determination is a very important but simple word. It just says, since 1948, okay, the Palestine people, where they are staying now, it was their homeland. Okay, let's first agree on that. So in 1948, where Palestine are now, where Israel are now, on the map, it was the entire land was the land of the indigenous Palestine people. Okay? And then, because Palestine, like South Africa, was colonized, since 1948 up until today, that's 78 years, what the Israelis have done is to engage in further land dispossessioning of the Palestine people. It's about the struggle of land dispossession. And it goes against the decision of the United Nations. It goes against the decision of the United Nations General Assembly. It goes against the decision of the United Nations Security Council. It goes against the decision of the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. So in the entire system of the UN, all UN organs, without exception, have said the conduct of Israel to continue to kill, maim, and land dispossess the people of Palestine. It's unjust, and it actually borders on criminality. So that is the struggle. Now, in Israel, and I want us to be absolutely clear here, we don't have any problem against Jewish people as South Africa. We don't have any problem with Judaism as a religion. What we have a problem with is Zionism as an ideological orientation. Because Zionism, ladies and gentlemen, like apartheid, is what is the single cause of the genocide and the enlargement of the genocide that we see against the Palestinian people. And what they do, they say, no. In the Bible, we speak about Israel as the chosen nation. So everything that they do, they want to justify it in terms of biblical sense. And that's why for students here today, it's important as force multipliers in society that you must know that your Bible has the 10 commandments. One of it says, thou shalt not kill. Isn't it so? And no genocide can be perpetuated against, because you don't have a God that is a God of Zionism. There's no such God. Whether it's God, whether it's Allah, it's the same God. And that is our fight. And that's why South Africa, because of our common and shared experience with apartheid, we are having a particular proximity to the struggle of the Palestinian people, because in the UN Charter, it says one of the rights for all member states of the UN is the right to self-determination. And that's why we have utilized the ICJ, the ICC, and all the structures to propel the struggle of the Palestinian people. Apart from the Palestinian people, you must know in Africa, there's a difficulty of the plight of the people of Western Sahara. It's once again a decolonial matter with the Kingdom of Morocco. Look at the history and look at the fact that when Spain as a colony and as a colonizer agreed to move out of Africa, the Kingdom of Morocco then engaged in large-scale land grab of all the territories of the people of Western Sahara that has minerals and that is the greatest arable land and that possess the greatest depths and quantities of fisheries. And as the students of IR, you must know about the economic embargo and the plight of the Cuban people. You must know about the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Ask yourself, the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, why it has happened? What is the difference between the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis and what happens in Ukraine? You need to ask yourself that issue. And that's why South Africa, we stand with the Cuban people, because the Cuban people are under unrelenting economic embargo, ladies and gentlemen, because of their beliefs as a nation. That look, they believe in socialism. They believe to share everything that they have as a nation, and they obviously get punished through what we call unilateral coercive measures and unilateral sanctions that is not enforced by the UNSC, but it's primarily because of the US and a number of other countries. The last pillar that I want to deal with, ladies and gentlemen, which is obviously the most important one, is our Pan-Africanism, okay? Now, look, South Africa, we are fortunate. Today, we are the most industrialized economy on the African continent, but we are also the economy, our GDP is now the biggest, you know that. You must know that 2 years back, the GDP of Nigeria exceeded the GDP of South Africa. As we speak now, South African GDP is bigger. So that's important. But if we, with your 32.9% unemployment, with the fact that the last time that we grew 6% of GDP that is required based on the NDP, the National Development Plan, says for South Africa to be prosperous, you need to grow your GDP with 6%. For us to have the same growth rate, ladies and gentlemen, than 2008, we need to industrialize, isn't it so? Now, our biggest problem is that our economy is an economy that are monopoly-based. Look in South Africa, you have basically 5 major banks only. Look in Europe, you have a plethora of major banks. One of the key mechanisms for our industrialization is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, ACFTA. So for students in economics, this is an important debate. Now your ACFTA, it's what we call a Pan-Africanist economic integration instrument. It's based on your Lagos Plan of Action and your Abuja Treaty. It says that, look, for us to stem our deindustrialization, as we speak today, out of your 55 African states, intra-Africa trade, ladies and gentlemen, stand at 16%. So what we do as South Africa and what we do as the rest of Africa, we trade with everyone else than Africa. Do you understand where's the difficulty? So your ACFTA will provide, for example, 90% tariff reduction. So if you produce a product here in South Africa and you export it to Kenya, it will have 90% tariff reduction. That's significant. So it will cost you almost nothing to take a product into Kenya. So the same product that you here produce, the only things that you will do is to pay your transport costs. Virtually nothing. And it's a flagship program. And your ACFTA, and for us here in the neighboring states, there's what you call a South African Customs Union, SACU. 5 states. South Africa is there, Lesotho, Namibia, Kingdom of Eswatini, Botswana is there. It's a customs union that is free for the movement of goods amongst these 5 countries here in the south of Africa. The good news for us is that the South African Customs Union, SACU, have submitted its tariff offerings to the Secretariat of the ACFTA. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, apart from our excise duties, our customs union area, these 5 nations will be able to trade once its tariff offerings has been ratified by the Secretariat amongst itself. So it's going to be what we call a force multiplier or a game changer in terms of our economic interest, our economic benefit, and the prosperity of the South African nation. The biggest antithesis to that development, the biggest antithesis is what I call the big man syndrome in Africa. The big man syndrome, where there's still unconstitutional changes of government. You must have read about the difficulties in the Sahel, where there's military overthrow of constitutionally elected government against the AU Charter. Against the AU Charter, because the AU Charter says, when we speak about democracy and governance, is that there must be regular intervals of civilian ownership of government through an elective process. Okay? But you still have this difficulty where there is some amongst our leaders that still continue to think that their futures can be best determined, their interests can best be advanced through the barrel of the gun. So we have the difficulty of unconstitutional changes of government, Secondly, you have what we call violent extremism, illicit financial flows. Illicit financial flows, that includes the issues of the flow of small arms, human trafficking taking place. But not as the final recipient, but as a transitional hub. As a transitional hub elsewhere to the world. I think you must have witnessed in the past 2-3 weeks the massive arrests of drug moles that are taking place at the OR Tambo, isn't it so? And you must have read the subtext. Remember, in life, it's not your headline, it's the subtext. The subtext of all the arrests, it's a drug mole that is en route to somewhere. Isn't it so? So South Africa are seen as a conduit, as a corridor, as a transitional point to the rest of the world. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, it is for that reason why the Irish have revoked in the entire 27 countries of the EU. The one country, Prof, that we had a free visa agreement was with Ireland. The Irish, 5 years back, warned us that your passport, your South African uniqueness and identity are being abused to get access from South Africa into Ireland. But remember, because Ireland is a member state of the EU, it means if you abuse the South African identity, you get access to Ireland and all other of the 27 states in the EU. And Ireland had to take a decision to revoke our visa-free regime. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So the consequence, ladies and gentlemen, the media sometimes, what we call the fourth estate, will criticize President Ramaphosa and say, no, why do you send troops of South Africa to Mozambique? I think you must have heard it. Why do you send troops of South Africa to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC? The first issue, ladies and gentlemen, in Mozambique, you had a big insurgency. And the insurgency only mushroomed when LNG, when your gas reserves and your deposits was discovered in the north of Mozambique in Cabo Delgado. And the insurgency was so well organized, well structured, and well funded that it outweighed the entire capability of the Mozambican Defense Force and the Mozambican government. And it was for that reason that SADC and the organ on political peace and cooperation took a decision to have a intervention force to assist the Mozambican government to undermine the insurgency. Why is it necessary for South Africa and Africa? Remember, we have a difficulty of energy here in Africa, isn't it so, to industrialize. We have been now successful to stem the flow of load shedding, but for us to continue in that trajectory, we need gas, isn't it so? Gas supplies, we have a South African, what we call Southern African Power Pool, gas pipeline from Mozambique to South Africa. So the plight of the Mozambican people, it's intertwined and interwoven with the plight of your grandmother, ladies and gentlemen. So I thought when we speak about these conflicts, always look at the consequence of political economy. It's exactly a mirror image of what is happening in the DRC, where you have a protracted conflict, where you have the government of President Felix Tshisekedi, and unfortunately, Mamela, unfortunately, or fortunately, the one country with the capacity in terms of peace enforcement is South Africa. And that's why the protracted struggle of the DRC the DRC, it's a state neighboring 9 countries. If there's instability in the DRC with the insurgency, it found expression already in Mozambique. Where is Mozambique? It's next to you, isn't it so? It's here next to us. So we have that type of Pan-African type of responsibility to help our fellow brothers and sisters. And our solidarity, ladies and gentlemen, with peace enforcement goes with economic solidarity, where you speak about economic solidarity with Zimbabwe for the same reasons, about the type of job inequalities that we are having, the instability of Zimbabwe because of the lack of their economic growth, because of unilateral sanctions of the EU and the US. Those are issues as Pan-Africanists that we'll continue to champion. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I thought that clearly I must also indicate to you that we want to make a commitment here, beyond this discussion, that we would want to come back and take you into confidence on our priorities as South Africa of the G20 presidency. Okay? I know most of you, your graduation date is next year, isn't it so? So the most important things in your life in 2025 is your graduation date and is the G20 presidency of South Africa. And we will tell you why at a very detailed level, because we are going to host in 2025 the G20 presidency, and because you are the students of the University of KZN, it's a flagship university. It's a university with unparalleled reputation, and it's a university that we would want to continue to work with in a number of countries in Africa, Tlali. There's a number of flagship programs, twinning agreements with the universities, forward linkages, and we are, through our public diplomacy, will announce just before we end of our cadet program. So those that would want to be trained to become foreign services officers, you must get into the cadet program. The only way to enter through the eye of the needle like a camel is to enter through DIRCO's cadet program. Are we together? Thank you very much for listening, ladies and gentlemen.